Nicolas Cage, a name that once blazed across Hollywood with wild energy and unforgettable passion. From the raw emotion of leaving Las Vegas to the explosive face-off and the adventurous national treasure, he became one of cinema's boldest and most unpredictable icons. But behind that fiery legacy lay storms of heartbreak and loss, 4 failed marriages, crushing debts and a loneliness fame couldn't fix. Before the world saw his brilliance, Nicolas Cage, born Nicholas Kim Coppola on January 7, 1964, in Long Beach, California, had already known silence and sorrow. The youngest of 3 brothers, he grew up in a home filled with intellect but haunted by emotional distance. His father, August Coppola, a literature professor, was brilliant yet demanding. His mother's quiet suffering echoed through the walls. Even as California danced to the rhythm of the 1960s, young Nicholas learned that pain often visits dreamers first. Nicolas Cage's story begins in a home filled with art, love, and quiet pain. His mother, Joy Vogelsang, a graceful dancer and choreographer, struggled with emotional instability, while his father, August Coppola, was a brilliant but distant literature professor. Their house smelled of old books and fading roses, beautiful yet fragile. At 12, Nicholas watched their marriage collapse, leaving behind silence and scars that shaped his soul. Raised by his strict father while his mother drifted in and out of hospitals, Cage learned to hide fear behind calm eyes, a skill that later defined his acting. Bullied at Beverly Hills High for being a Coppola, he reinvented himself, donning a leather jacket and a new name, first Roy Richards, then Nicolas Cage, inspired by John Cage and Marvel's Luke Cage. He broke free from his family's drawn to the emotional power of James Dean and Bruce Lee. He found solace in acting, turning his pain into passion. Every silence, every heartbreak became fuel for his art. The boy once haunted by his mother's tears grew into a man who gave that silence a voice, one performance at a time. Pain has a cruel way of following you, even when you run until your lungs give out. For Nicolas Cage, the silence of childhood never left. It only changed form. It became rejection, empty pockets, and sleepless nights in borrowed rooms. At 17, he walked away from the comfort of the Coppola name, choosing struggle over privilege. He slept in cars, worked odd jobs, and whispered lines to himself in the dark. A boy chasing the sound of his own voice, invisible among thousands of dreamers in 1980s Hollywood. Cage sold popcorn at the Fairfax Theater, feeding others' dreams while starving for his own. When his small roles vanished from the screen, his hope dimmed, but not his resolve. Pain became his teacher. Rejection became ritual. When his uncle Francis Ford Coppola offered him a role, Nicholas took it not as charity, but as a test. Soon after, he shed his family name, becoming Nicolas Cage. A tribute to chaos, strength, and rebirth. He pushed limits that terrified others. He pulled teeth for Birdie to feel real pain, lived in isolation for Racing with the Moon, and treated acting not as fame, but as truth. Hollywood called him insane. He called it honesty. Then came Moonstruck, 1987. Acting beside Cher, Cage's wild, magnetic energy turned a simple love story into lightning. For the first time, the applause was his. The boy who once swept theater floors now stood under lights that never dimmed. But fame has a way of stealing the quiet it once promised. By 1990, he returned louder, stranger, more fearless and wild at heart, a storm of chaos and tenderness that won the Palme d'Or. Critics called him reckless. Audiences called him real. Madness, he said, can be a form of truth. Yet by 1995, that truth was consuming him. Leaving Las Vegas demanded his soul. When he won the Oscar, the cheers sounded less like victory and more like mourning. The mid-90s crowned him a legend. The Rock, Con Air, Face Off, each a box office inferno. From sleeping in cars to earning $20 million a film, he'd conquered Hollywood. But every triumph came with exhaustion. Nights blurred under trailer lights. He was everywhere and nowhere. Then came City of Angels. On screen, he gave up eternity for love. Off-screen, he was searching for something real. Even as national treasure made him one of the richest men in Hollywood, he found himself staring into hotel mirrors at 3 a.m., wondering what he'd lost. He had won the world, but maybe lost himself along the way. Fame turned to fire and fire to ashes. Castles, cars, and islands followed, an empire of marble and ghosts. But in 2008, it all crumbled. Debt, taxes, silence. He refused bankruptcy, selling everything piece by piece. The myth became a man again. Pain teaches you what applause can't, he said. So he worked. 4, sometimes 5 films a year. Not for fame, for redemption. Through Joe, Mandy, and Pig, he rose again, scarred but reborn. Maybe I needed to lose it all, he said softly. To remember that acting was never about money. It was about truth. And when the storm cleared, a calmer fire remained. The castles were gone, but the artist stayed. Sometimes destruction isn't the end. It's the beginning of seeing yourself clearly for the first time. She became my North Star, he said later. I wasn't chasing her. I was chasing the idea that something pure could still exist. Almost 10 years had passed, and he had learned to live without her. Or so he thought. But on the edge of a new beginning, as he prepared to marry Kristen Zhang, Patricia Arquette reappeared and destiny began again. Within months, they were married. 2 souls who believed passion could conquer time, distance, and all the ghosts that lived between them. In those first years, their life was cinematic in every sense. They drove with the top down through the desert at night, headlights carving gold through the darkness, singing along to old records that only they seemed to know by heart. They rented small motel on the way to nowhere, ordered room service at dawn, and left love notes tucked into half-packed suitcases before film sets pulled them apart again. On quiet mornings, he would brew coffee just to hear her laugh. She would read him poems and underline the lines that sounded like him. For a moment, a brief burning moment, it felt like they had both outrun destiny. Friends described them as electric. It was like watching lightning fall in love with gasoline, one of them said. And for a while it worked. 2 storms dancing instead of colliding. They didn't just love each other, they believed they were rewriting what love could be. But even the brightest flames cast the darkest shadows. Slowly the laughter began to fade between takes. The distance between film sets became the distance between hearts. Fame built invisible walls. Long absences, missed birthdays, good nights spoken over phone static. Patricia would later admit, "We were in love with the idea of love, not with each other." And Cage, with a quiet ache, said it burned bright and then it burned out. But while it lasted, it felt eternal. By 2000, the house that once rang with laughter had fallen into silence. Dinners turned cold before they were touched. Fame had given them everything except the strength to stay. When the end came, it wasn't with anger. It was with fatigue. A suitcase left half-packed by the door. A light left on in an empty room. Though their marriage lasted 6 years on paper, they had truly lived together for less than a year. 2 meteors that burned in the same sky only for a moment before drifting apart. 2 people who had once been larger than life now whispering their final goodbye. By 2001, the marriage was over. No scandal, no spectacle. Just the soft, almost sacred collapse of something that had once burned like the sun. They had no children together. And when the end finally came, there were no fights, no lawsuits, no bitterness, only silence. And 2 hearts learning how to let go with grace. Years later, when asked about her, Cage's voice turned fragile. She was a storm, he whispered. Beautiful, terrifying. And I think I'll always hear her in the distance. After Patricia, he buried himself in work, not to forget her, but to survive her. The wildness remained, but now it carried the weight of memory. The ache of a man who had loved without armor, and paid for it in pieces. Every performance after carried a ghost of that storm, a tenderness carved out of pain. It's cruel how love can both destroy and define you. Patricia Arquette was that paradox, the woman who consumed and completed him. She didn't ruin his life, she revealed his soul. And when people ask Nicolas Cage why he still believes in love after everything, he only smiles. The kind of smile that remembers because he's already lived the kind of love most people only see in movies. The kind that burns too bright to last, yet somehow never stops glowing. It wasn't long after his last goodbye. Barely a year after his marriage to Patricia Arquette had faded into memory, fate appeared again. This time wearing a name the whole world already knew. Lisa Marie Presley, the daughter of the king. But to Nicolas Cage, she wasn't an icon or a legacy. She was a quiet spark, a woman who carried both the weight of her name and the ache of her own loneliness. I didn't marry Lisa because she was Presley's daughter, he once said. I married her because I loved her. Still, the world watched as two haunted hearts, both born into myth, tried to build something real beneath the blinding glare of history. Their connection was immediate, strange, and undeniable.